Hi, my name is Maureen Sherbondy. I grew up in Metuchen, New Jersey, and I'm so happy to be speaking to some Metuchenites through the Metuchen Public Library today. My maiden name is Kadish, and actually my mother still lives in Metuchen. So it's kind of nice to visit remotely through Zoom today and talk about my writing and how it all started out in Metuchen, and how I have my first young adult novel, which is called Lucky Brilliant. Here's the cover of the book. Okay, so I actually wrote an essay recently for a blog post, and I talked about my writing journey. And when I sat down and started thinking about it, I realized that when I was in the Metuchen public school system, I think when I was in 6th grade, I had a teacher named Mrs. Brim who gave us this wonderful assignment to write a book and then to laminate it. And it was going to be available at the Metuchen Public Library on the shelves. I was so excited about this. So the other students didn't want to do this, but this just sounded like fun to me because I like to write. So I actually found the book, and here it is. The terrible thing is I am not an artist. My brother's an artist, and so I had to illustrate the book. So it has this terrible picture on the front. But it was called The Dog That Didn't Have a Name. And I was just telling Maura that it has a Metuchen Public Library card here, and it has the date stamps, which shows my age here. It was stamped in 1976, because I think they kept it for a little while. And it was written in 1975. I even had a little copyright page. So that's where my journey began. There were a couple other influences for my journey to become a writer. I used to walk all the way to Metuchen High School from where I lived, which was off Durham Road in Metuchen. So it was pretty far. It was, I think, 1.9 miles. And we didn't have buses. I don't know if they have them now, except for track meets, because I was on the track team in high school, and that the bus would take us to our meets. On the way to the high school, I would pass a famous poet's house, John Ciardi, who was a very famous poet, and where everybody else was into finding out who the movie stars were and that type of celebrity, my celebrities were the authors. And when I discovered that John Ciardi lived in our town, I was very impressed by that. And every time I would pass by his house on the way to Metuchen High School, I would look at it and say, that's what I want to be. I want to be a writer one day. So I wrote when I was younger, and I continued to study at Rutgers University, but I did not major in writing. I majored in psychology because I didn't think I was going to be good enough to ever become a published writer. That just goes to show you that the things you are afraid to do, you think you're going to fail, you should keep doing them. Don't let that discourage you. I also worked at the Metuchen Library. I believe I was 15 years old. I might have been 14. And I used to shelve the books there. So those were my connections to the library in Metuchen. After college, I tried some other jobs. I was in sales. I did other things. And I eventually found my way back to writing. When my third son, that was born in 3 years, was a baby, I decided that I wanted to start writing again. And within a year, I started sending my work out, and luckily became a published writer. So I sent poems out and I sent stories out. And because I had young children at home, I could not really have a lot of time to write longer pieces like novels or short stories even. So even though I had some short stories published early on, I just didn't have the time till my kids were off at school. So eventually I had a lot of poetry books that came out. Here's my most recent one. This is called Dancing with Dolly. And this book contains ekphrastic poems about art, poems in response to art. Here's another book cover. This is called The Art of Departure. These are poems about departure. And this one's really fun. A lot of high school students like this one. It's called Beyond Fairy Tales. So I reinvented the fairy tales, and they're kind of funny and interesting to read. So I became more advanced at writing poetry just because of the time limitations. And then I came back to writing short stories, and eventually I wrote my novel. So my first novel is Lucky Brilliant, as I mentioned. And I'm going to read a little bit, and I'm going to tell you what Lucky Brilliant is about first, okay? So the book's main character is a 15-year-old girl named Lucky Brilliant. She wants to change both the past and the future. After her father, Chase Brilliant, who is quite charming and charismatic, he's murdered for his winning New Jersey lottery ticket. So Lucky learns after her husband is killed that he was not the person she thought he was. So there are a lot of these secrets that unfold throughout the book. So I think it's very fast paced, and it's kind of a page turner because you want to keep reading to find out what else do we not know about Lucky's father. When Lucky begins to have psychic dreams that predict the future, she tries to prevent more terrible events from happening. So even though the book is based in realism, where there are some terrible real life situations, some of the things that happen are that she's neglected by her mother just because the mother is grief-stricken, and she's really all alone in the world, and she has to fend for herself. She does have a best friend who is the next door neighbor, and then she has a crush on the neighbor's older brother, and his name is Silas. So those are some of the characters. There's also a kindly neighbor named Mr. Keane, and she goes to him for advice, and he kind of looks out for her. And he came from a really nice neighbor that I had. The colonel of him came from this wonderful man that used to read the Wizard of Oz books to me when I was a kid. He didn't have kids of his own at the time. And so I wanted to have that nice, kindly neighbor. I think that it's important to have a community of helpers when bad things are happening. So that comes into play in the book as well. So I'm going to read just a little bit from the book. So I've talked about the main characters, and I have a scene where we get to see a little bit of the interaction between the father and Lucky, even though he has passed at the beginning of the book. He was a dreamer. That's what you need to know about him, and unrealistic. Okay, so I'll start the scene here. It's going back in time to when he was still alive. Looking at the unfinished dollhouse, I felt like I had been stung all over again. Dad had promised it would be finished years ago when I still played with dolls. Every time I asked him about the house, he shrugged, smiled, and said, "Next year, Lucky." He would describe his elaborate plans, drawing sketches of the blue roof tiles and the molding he was going to order. The appliances would look like the fancy Thermidor ovens in kitchen and house magazines. A tray ceiling would adorn the living room. Dad had even found an artist who would make replica figurines of us all, even Monty. Monty's their dog. He was so wrapped up in his plans that I forgave him the endless delays. When I'm a famous actor and we live in Beverly Hills, our house will be like this, only a little bigger, of course, he said. Then he would talk about the time he was in a real movie. He had read about a casting call for extras in a movie about the mafia that was shooting in Atlantic City. It was R-rated, but he and Mom took me anyway on the night that it opened at the Brickville Theater. I remember the movie was full of Italian actors who reminded me of Ava's family, with dark hair and brown eyes. During one scene on the crowded boardwalk, Dad pointed to the screen and whispered, "Look close, that's me in the white shirt." When the movie ended, he asked, "So what did you think of your old man?" "Well, it was kind of hard to see you," I said. "I recognized your hair and your walk, but I couldn't see your face. I thought you had a speaking part." I did, he said. They must have cut it. They do that in the editing room. Even the stars have their dialogue cut. He seemed quiet and a little sad. You're famous, I said, guilty that I had taken away his smile. Yeah, at least I can add it to my resume. It's a real film credit. The phone should start ringing off the hook any day now. I'm sure the agents in Hollywood will be contacting me now. It was difficult to tell if he was being serious. We were walking away from the theater. Mom put her arm around him and said, You did stand out from the other extras. The camera loved you. Really? Dad smiled at her as if starving for a compliment. He was acting like Mom did when she was unsure if an outfit looked good before a big night out. Of course, she said. Dad leaned in and kissed her. But the phone calls never came. At night, Dad paced the living room, stopping in front of the phone, picking it up to make sure it worked. Then he would bang the receiver down. So I'll stop there. That just gives you a little bit of a taste of what the father was like. So he was a real estate agent. He was not making ends meet. They were not doing well financially. And then after he died suddenly, he leaves them penniless and struggling. So poor Lucky has to fend for herself, and she eats a lot of meals at her neighbor's house, but she's hungry most of the time. So I thought it was important to bring that subject into a young adult novel, because I know that sometimes teens are struggling, and it's nice to have a book they can read so they don't feel like they're the only ones out there. So that's Lucky Brilliant. It was published by Black Rose Writing, and it's available. You can get it at local indie bookstores, hopefully at your local library. Also online, it's available in both paperback and ebook format for those of you who like to download things. I wanted to just finish with a poem. Okay, so I write poetry too, as I said, and I wrote a poem about New Jersey. I now live in North Carolina. I'm in Durham, North Carolina. That's the RTP area, near Raleigh. Raleigh's the capital of North Carolina. And I haven't lived in New Jersey since I was 21 years old. And sometimes I feel like I don't sound like I'm from New Jersey anymore. And this poem came out of that, out of a conversation I had with my mother, and it's called Losing Jersey. So I'm going to end with the poem. On the phone from New Jersey, my mother declares with a laugh, You're beginning to sound Southern. I flinch, shake my head, no, 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 to the empty room in my Raleigh home. No, I am not, I reply, verbal arsenal ready to spout a repertoire of denial. 10 years spent here, I swore across state lines it would not happen. When you said dog just now, my heart races through the possibility of change, the question, how could this have happened to me, Jersey girl who used to listen to Springsteen, spend summers at the Jersey Shore, Asbury, Belmar, Long Beach Island? Sure, I've surrounded myself with Southern friends from towns with names I can't pronounce, Fuquay Varina, Salisbury, Beaufort. I have listened to them talk, admired the slow molasses way their tongues caress words before releasing phrases into the Southern air, but emulation? I quickly try to prove her wrong, let out a song of words to show my birth origin, Metuchen. Coffee, awful, I nervously ramble on. The Jersey's gone, is her reply. No trace of it evident now. Jersey fading from the telephone line, like static heard then gone. An empty echo of loss, replacing any accent on my Carolina tongue. So thank you for listening. I hope you'll get a chance to read Lucky Brilliant. And I have a website. You can look up my other books and information about me. You can send notes through my website. It's www.MaureenSherbondy.com. Sherbondy is Sherbondy. Thank you so much for listening today.